National plan doesn't fix housing crisis, Hipkins. Labour leader Chris Hipkins says the Nationals Party's plan to tighten emergency housing criteria will remove people in need from the list. That doesn't actually fix the housing crisis, Hipkins said at a media stand-up in the Ramutaka electorate on Saturday. Pretending the homeless people and people who haven't got adequate housing don't exist isn't the way to fix the housing crisis. The National Party plans to wind down the use of motels as emergency accommodation, and move families into social housing. It said to get an emergency housing grant, families would need to be in genuine need, and there must be no genuine alternative accommodation available. The party planned to increase the number of social housing places funded by government, as well as provide more capital to community housing providers to compete with Kaingaora. Hipkins said his electorate office saw people all the time who had a genuine housing need. We need to have more public houses in order to satisfy that housing need. The last time National was in government it did the same thing, effectively cutting down demand by cutting criteria, Hipkins said. When the National Party were last in government, they basically deleted the lowest two levels of priority on the public housing waiting list. What that meant was that those people, with their housing needs didn't go away, their housing needs just got worse and worse. Part of the reason we've seen an explosion in Priority 1 and Priority 2 applications for public housing is that these people have been around a long time and it's just that their needs have gotten greater since the National Party purged them from the list in the first place. National said it would establish a Priority 1 category on the social housing register for families who have been in emergency housing motels or sleeping in cars for longer than 12 weeks, putting them at the front of the queue for social housing. Hipkins on National's literacy policy. Hipkins said National's policy requiring schools to use structured literacy to teach reading and writing, announced on Friday, would disadvantage some children. National said if elected it planned to have primary school teachers learn the approach as part of certification, introduce phonics checks to test Year 2's reading, and bring in structured literacy interventions for those who need extra support. Hipkins said a range of tools were needed to strengthen literacy and numeracy. Picking just one would ultimately disadvantage some children, he said. Anybody who's been in a classroom and seen a whole range of different kids will know that different kids have got different strengths and weaknesses, and you teach different kids in different ways based on the strengths and weaknesses that they've got. Hipkins said National tried the same one-size-fits-all approach with national standards and that made things worse. On the campaign trail, Hipkins was campaigning on home soil in the Ramutaka electorate on Saturday. With just 5 weeks until the election, he visited stall holders and locals at the Upper Hut Spring Festival and was all smiles as he wandered down Main Street greeting residents like old friends. Thousands of people were at the festivities, many stopping to take a picture with leader, while Hut South candidate Ginny Anderson played photographer. Hipkins described the vibe out on the streets as positive and in his own electorate he was not met by many opponents. But he said Labour's campaign still had a lot of ground to cover, with many voters still undecided.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.
The strengths and limits of Pierre Poilievre's common sense. If an election were held tomorrow, polls suggest Pierre Poilievre would defeat Justin Trudeau and become the 24th Prime Minister of Canada. And if an election were to happen tomorrow, the Conservative leader says the choice would be quite straightforward. Canadians will have only two options, Poilievre told the Conservative Party convention in Quebec City last night. A common-sense Conservative government that frees hard-working people to earn powerful paychecks that buy affordable food, gas, and homes in safe neighborhoods. Or a reckless coalition of Trudeau and the NDP that punishes your work, taxes your money, taxes your food, doubles your housing bill and unleashes crime and chaos in your neighborhood. The explanation why Poilievre and the Conservatives have recently come to lead the Liberals in public surveys by substantial margins is probably at least as simple. For one thing, Poilievre is not Trudeau. If Canadians are unhappy with the current state of things or merely tired of Trudeau's administration, Poilievre is offering not just an alternative, but something very different. More importantly, Poilievre is promising that all the things that currently seem to cost too much, your mortgage, your rent, gas, groceries, would cost less if he was in charge. This is what Poilievre spends most of his time talking about these days. Probably because this is what most Canadians are most worried about right now. Poilievre does not have as much to say anymore about the things he used to talk about. There was nothing in his speech on Friday night about wokeism or elites or the liberal media. He didn't mention the Freedom Convoy or extol the virtues of cryptocurrency. He didn't repeat his vow to fire the governor of the Bank of Canada. There was only a winking reference to the World Economic Forum. He didn't even call the Prime Minister a Marxist, which he was recently recorded doing while door-knocking in a by-election. Savvy pundits would call this a pivot. But Poilievre preemptively dismissed such a thing in an interview last year. "I am who I am," he told the Calgary Sun. What Poilievre is talking about now are all the things the Trudeau government is struggling to find simple answers for: inflation, housing, and what has euphemistically come to be known as the cost of living. And what Poilievre is emphasizing now is common sense. He is hardly the first politician to claim it, that vaguely egalitarian and inherently populist notion that flatters its purveyors and supporters while implicitly disqualifying its opponents and critics. Who would dare disagree with something as sensible and universal as common sense? Surely only some out-of-touch snob would attempt to quibble or dismiss something so obvious and true. Wielded by Poilievre, common sense is no doubt meant to contrast with the ideas and schemes of Trudeau and the Liberal government. And there was, in Poilievre's remarks, an explicit promise to get back to the way things were before the Liberals came to office in 2015, as if the last 8 years had been some kind of historical aberration. Easier said than done. But what common sense would mean in practice, that is, if Poilievre were to form government, is still largely left to the imagination. "My common sense plan cuts waste and caps spending to bring down inflationary deficits and interest rates," he said on Friday night. "My common sense plan is to have a new funding formula that links the number of federal dollars cities get for infrastructure to the number of houses they allow to be completed." Such things might be altogether easier said than done, and not free of consequences that some Canadians might not enjoy or appreciate. The Liberals are already linking some federal funding to the construction of new houses. At the very least, it is not yet possible to know how Poilievre's promises of tax and spending cuts would add up. But it is impossible to question the validity of the anxious and frustrated Canadians that Poilievre says he encountered, individuals who are dealing with the very real consequences of inflation and a dysfunctional housing market. In the face of such stories, it is hard, and perhaps even foolish, to argue the finer points of global inflation trends. And it is not hard to see the appeal of the idyllic, 1950s tinged portrait of an imagined future that Poilievre painted at the end of his speech, one of shopkeepers sweeping storefronts, kids playing street hockey, and young couples sitting on front porch swings basking in the comfort of cold drinks and financial security. But in the summer of 2023 that pleasant scene could be interrupted by wildfires or blankets of smoke. That couple might not have been on the porch because it was hard to breathe outside. Or because they were forced to flee their home. Or because their house burned down. Such problems went unmentioned on Friday night. And Poilievre's climate-related commitments remain scant. He is strident in his desire to axe the federal carbon tax, and he would also repeal the clean fuel regulations. Otherwise, he says he would focus on clean energy and technologies. Technology, not taxes, is Poilievre's slogan. After this summer, the common sense of having a plan to meet Canada's greenhouse gas emissions targets is all the more apparent. But for now it is enough to not be Trudeau and to promise to make life a little bit easier.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos. Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.
What's in a name? India's Modi sits behind Bharat placard at G20 summit. When Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the Group of 20, G20, Leaders Summit on Saturday, he sat behind a country name placard that piqued the interest of many. The placard didn't say India, the name that his country is customarily known by internationally. Instead it read Bharat, the Sanskrit or Hindi title of the country, fueling speculation that his government plans to phase out the country's English designation altogether. PM Modi uses placard Bharat for G20 inaugural address, ran a headline in the Times of India, one of the country's largest English-language outlets, moments after. Is it an indication of new beginnings, asked the Hindi outlet ABP News. Both India and Bharat are used officially in the nation of 1.4 billion people, which has more than 20 official languages. Bharat is also the Hindi word for India and is used interchangeably, both feature on Indian passports for example. But the word was the center of a controversy this week after dinner invites for the Group of 20, G20, Leaders Summit referred to India as Bharat, fueling a political row and public debate over what the country should be called, its history and colonial legacy. The use on the invites marked a notable change in the naming convention used by the country on the international stage. Modi and his Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP. Indian officials at the G20 event are also wearing badges that read, Bharat Official. The G20 summit is a first for India as Modi aims to raise New Delhi's global clout following nearly a decade-long tenure in power in which he has positioned himself as a leader intent on shedding the country's colonial past, emphasizing the need to liberate ourselves from the slavery mindset. Britain ruled India for about 200 years until it gained independence in 1947, and Modi has been keen to position himself as a disruptor of India's colonial legacy, making steps to steer the country away from what it has called vestiges of British rule. These efforts also include changing the names of roads and buildings that honor India's Muslim identity, as well as its erstwhile Islamic leaders, the Mughals, who have left an indelible legacy on the subcontinent, to instead celebrate the country's Hindu majority. Some of his supporters say the name the country is best known by globally is a remnant of the colonial era. An abuse or an incalculable brand. The name India has been derived by ancient Western civilizations from the Sanskrit word for the Indus River, Sindhu, and was later adapted by the British Empire. The word India is an abuse given to us by the British, whereas the word Bharat is a symbol of our culture, Harnath Singh Yadav, a BJP politician, told Indian news agency ANI. A former Indian cricket star, Virender Sehwag, also urged the sports officials to use Bharat on players' shirts during the Men's Cricket World Cup, which will be held in India this year. But the use of Bharat on the G20 invites has raised eyebrows among opposition leaders. While there is no constitutional objection to calling India Bharat, which is one of the country's two official names, I hope the government will not be so foolish as to completely dispense with India, which has incalculable brand value built up over centuries, Shashi Tharoor, a former diplomat and prominent lawmaker from the main opposition Congress Party, wrote on social media earlier this week. In July, the leaders from 26 Indian opposition parties formed an alliance, known as India, or the Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance, in a bid to unseat Modi in the next general election. Some opposition politicians said the government's use of Bharat was a response to the formation of the India Alliance. How can the BJP strike down India? The country doesn't belong to a political party, it belongs to all Indians, Aam Aadmi Party lawmaker Raghav Chadha, an alliance member, said on social media. Our national identity is not the BJP's personal property that it can modify on whims and fancies. But in an interview with local news agency ANI, India's Minister of External Affairs S. Jaishankar said India is Bharat. It is there in the constitution. I would invite everybody to read it, he said. When you say Bharat, it evokes a sense, a meaning, and a connotation.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos. Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.
PM Lee pays tribute to Richard Hu, says Singapore owes its gratitude to late finance minister. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong on Saturday, September 9, paid tribute to the late Dr. Richard Hu, saying the country owed the former finance minister its gratitude for a lifetime of contribution and service to nation. Dr. Hu, who was finance minister from 1985 to 2001, died on Friday at the age of 96. He entered politics in 1984, the same year as Mr. Lee. As a close colleague and friend for many years, Dr. Hu left a lasting legacy in the field of finance, said Mr. Lee, who listed the achievements of Dr. Hu, from his time in GIC, to the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MOS, and finally as the finance chief of Singapore. Dr. Hu joined the GIC board when it was first formed in 1981 and was its first private sector member. He would go on to lead GIC's real estate arm, and with him at the helm, the GIC real estate team made its first foray into the region, and has since grown into a global real estate institutional investor, said Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee also recognized Dr. Hu's time at MOS, where he was both managing director and then chairman between 1983 and 1997. Under his leadership during these formative years, MOS established its credentials for stringent supervision and regulation of the financial sector, and sound monetary policy, Mr. Lee wrote. The 1980s and 1990s saw episodes of volatility in international financial markets, he added. Throughout, MOS steadfastly maintained its exchange rate-centered monetary policy, emphasizing the role of a stable Singapore dollar in preserving the purchasing power of Singaporean households, and saw off a few speculative attacks on the exchange rate. Mr. Lee noted that Dr. Hu also oversaw the overhaul of our securities regulatory framework, which facilitated the subsequent development of our capital markets and laid the foundation for Singapore to become a thriving global financial hub. On his 16 years as finance minister, Mr. Lee said Dr. Hu oversaw a period of high growth and substantial budget surpluses. Under his prudent management, these surpluses steadily accumulated in our reserves, to become the unique resource that Singapore can now rely upon, both for routine budget spending, and in crises with the permission of the President. Mr. Lee also acknowledged Dr. Hu's contributions to key financial policies in Singapore, including the introduction of the Goods and Services Tax, GST, in 1994. This enabled us to lower income and corporate taxes at a time when many other countries were doing the same, challenging our international competitiveness, said Mr. Lee. It also created a resilient source of revenue which became increasingly important as the government's spending needs grew. Mr. Lee added that Dr. Hu did not just push through the GST, but also introduced a comprehensive package of support and offset to help businesses and households cope. This was the model for many subsequent assistance packages from the government that have benefited generations of Singaporeans, he said. Current and former finance ministers Lawrence Wong and Hung Swee Keat also paid tribute to Dr. Hu. He stewarded our finances well, and provided a steady hand to steer our economy through the 1997 Asian financial crisis, Mr. Wong, who is also the Deputy Prime Minister, said on Friday. Mr. Hung, currently Deputy Prime Minister and Coordinating Minister for Economic Policies, lauded Dr. Hu's wisdom and foresight, describing how GST created a more resilient tax base for Singapore and boosted our international competitiveness. Dr. Hu played an instrumental role in transforming Singapore into a leading financial hub through an overhaul of our financial and banking sectors, he said, adding that his contributions to Singapore will leave a lasting imprint. Offering his condolences to Dr. Hu's family, Mr. Lee said he would be deeply missed. I will always warmly remember his wise counsel, strong sense of stewardship, and deep concern for Singaporeans.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos. Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.
South Africa, Zulu leader Mangosuthu Buthelezi dies aged 95. Mangosuthu Buthelezi, a prominent figure in South African politics and an outspoken Zulu chief, has passed away at the age of 95. During the era of the racist apartheid regime, he established the Zulu Nkatha Party, having become disenchanted with the African National Congress, ANC. This period saw thousands lose their lives in clashes between supporters of these two parties in the early 1990s. However, he was eventually reconciled with the ANC, and he served as Minister of Home Affairs during President Nelson Mandela's administration. Chief Poilievre was a savvy yet controversial politician who differed with the ANC's approach of armed resistance against white minority rule. Instead, he pursued a moderate path while leading an ethnic Zulu homeland. He held opposing views on international sanctions against South Africa, believing that such measures would primarily harm the country's black majority. Chief Poilievre also held the hereditary title of chief among the Zulus, South Africa's largest ethnic group. He served as the Prime Minister of KwaZulu, the Zulu homeland, and in 1975, he founded the Nkatha Freedom Party, which was both a Zulu political and cultural movement. After leading the party for 44 years, he stepped down as its leader in 2019.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.
Top Poilievre advisor says conservatives are experiencing a rejuvenation. A key member of the brain trust that surrounds Pierre Poilievre says that the Conservative Party is undergoing a rejuvenation under the new leader, partially through outreach to several previously skeptical voting blocs. There's been an evolution in terms of who the conservative supporter is, who the conservative voter is. Right now, we're seeing an entirely new group of people, a new demographic of people that are looking at the Conservative Party and looking at Pierre Poilievre as being the next Prime Minister very seriously, Jenny Byrne said in an interview with 24newsread.blogspot.com's The House airing Saturday. I think what's exciting is that right now we are seeing a rejuvenation of the Conservative Party. The Conservatives are on the final day of their first policy convention under Poilievre's leadership, which has also introduced a new party logo. The party says over 2,500 people registered for the Quebec City gathering, more than any convention has seen since the modern Conservative Party's founding in 2003. Poilievre has focused on a message promising common-sense solutions to housing affordability, the opioid crisis, crime, and economic uncertainty. That message has been combined with a ferocious attack on the Liberals and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Poilievre on Friday accused Trudeau of breaking the promise of Canada, the idea that each generation would have a better life than the one before it. Mr. Trudeau and I agree that things are broken. We just disagree on what's broken and who broke it. He thinks the people are the problem, when Canadians know he is the problem, Poilievre said during his keynote speech. Liberals have countered that Poilievre is importing far-right American-style politics. Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault made a surprise appearance outside the convention, saying Poilievre's agenda represented a step backwards for Canada. We understand that some Canadians are having a hard time right now, but the solution is not to go back on everything we've been doing, he said. It's not to cut back support for Canadians. Speaking with Cullen, Byrne defended Poilievre's tone. I think what people like about Pierre is he tells it as it is, she said. She accused other politicians including the current Prime Minister of delivering divisive rhetoric. The common sense agenda. The Conservatives are enjoying a substantial lead in public polling, with some surveys suggesting a double-digit lead over the Liberals. Byrne, who served as Stephen Harper's Deputy Chief of Staff and as Principal Secretary to Ontario Premier Doug Ford, told Cullen that Canadians of all kinds are responding to the party's common-sense message on affordability. Byrne cited millennials, women, new Canadians and former NDP voters as key demographics that are considering the Conservatives in a new light. A major part of the broader Poilievre message has been about housing, which this summer emerged as perhaps the dominant political issue in Canada. Poilievre has proposed withholding federal funds from cities that don't make significant changes to permitting and zoning rules to allow for boosted development, and rewarding those that meet a target of increasing permits 15% or increase per year. The cities can't have it both ways. They can't say, sorry, this is our decision as to whether homes are being built, and then say, But please, I need a handout to build infrastructure, Byrne said. Byrne skirted questions about some hot-button issues at the convention, including a proposal to endorse the idea of banning gender-affirming treatments for children. Byrne said she looks forward to what the membership decides on the issue following the debate. She also sought to avoid questions about whether the party would entertain attempts to reinvigorate the abortion debate in Canada. Obviously, if there are groups that did not see policies that they were espousing or they wanted, it was evident that it was not the priority for conservatives across the country, in every region, Byrne said. Byrne repeated a long-standing Poilievre promise to dismantle the federal carbon tax, but said specifics of the Conservatives' plan would come closer to the next election.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos. Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.